The auction house was silent, save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. In the center of the cold concrete floor, a German shepherd lay motionless. His once majestic coat was now matted with dirt and scars, his body a patchwork of wounds from battles long past. No one seemed to care for the dog who had given so much in his service, now left to be sold to the highest bidder, as if his life meant nothing more than the value of a few dollars. The crowd murmured in disapproval as the auctioneer's voice sliced through the air. "Starting bid at $50, he said, his voice harsh and dismissive, barely hiding the disdain in his tone. "Anyone? All right, $50 for this damaged goods." The man's words echoed through the room, and a ripple of laughter followed. A few people exchanged glances, clearly uninterested in the broken animal lying before them. To them, this was just another failed tool, another casualty of war with no place in society. But beneath the ridicule, the German shepherd's eyes told a different story. Though his body trembled with exhaustion, there was something else in his gaze, a flicker of something far more than the cold indifference of the crowd. A glimmer of hope? A spark of courage, still burning despite everything that had happened to him? Perhaps. At first glance, this dog was just another broken soldier, scarred, discarded, and forgotten by the world. But what no one could have known, as they bid against each other like it was any other transaction, was that this dog had one brave act left in him. One moment of courage that would change everything. What happened next would prove that heroes come in many forms. And sometimes, the most unexpected of them all is the one who shows the deepest loyalty. The auction house was cold, the air heavy with the scent of dust and the lingering echo of indifferent footsteps. The walls, weathered and cracked from years of neglect, seemed to sag under the weight of the forgotten animals that were routinely sold here. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering sporadically, casting harsh shadows across the room. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, each one holding a creature of some kind, a dog, a horse, a bird, all with eyes that told stories of neglect, abuse, or worse. But it was the German shepherd who stood at the center, and it was his story that was about to unfold in the most unexpected of ways. The harsh clang of a metal chair being scraped across the floor brought the room to life. A murmur spread through the crowd as people shuffled in their seats, some with papers in hand, others with empty pockets, all gathered for the same grim purpose: to bid on what they could, what they saw as nothing more than another commodity. The German shepherd, however, remained motionless. His body was a map of scars, his fur matted and patchy, his ribs visible under a dull, once proud coat. He lay there as if he had already given up, exhausted by the world that had abandoned him, just as the people around him did now. His face, however, told a different story. His eyes, though clouded with pain and fatigue, still held a flicker of something deeper. The spark of a warrior, a survivor. But it was a survivor who had seen too much, too many battles fought and lost, and was now left to fade in the shadows of this cruel place. The auctioneer, dressed in a disheveled suit, walked up to the microphone, his voice grating against the heavy silence in the room. All right, he called, his voice echoing off the cold walls. "We've got a real gem up next. This one's a former military dog. Used up, broken, but still breathing." He chuckled, an empty sound that made the room feel even colder. "Starting bid at $50. Anyone interested?" "All right, $50. Who'll take him?" A few chuckles erupted from the back row, and several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between the dog and each other. Some turned away, uninterested. Others raised an eyebrow, but none of them saw a hero. None of them saw the dog that had fought, bled, and served. To them, he was just another failure, another discarded tool. Nothing more than damaged goods. Damaged goods, the auctioneer repeated, as if the words tasted bitter on his tongue. His eyes scanned the room, looking for someone, anyone, who would offer him even a few coins for the dog. Not worth a dime, I'd say. But hey, you never know, right? A starting bid of $50. Anyone? And yet, in the corner of the room, under the harsh, flickering lights, the German shepherd's eyes lifted, just slightly. They met the auctioneer's eyes, and for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition passed between them. Something unspoken, something deeper than any words could convey. His eyes were not those of a broken animal. They were eyes that had seen the worst, yes, but they still held a spark of defiance. They still held the story of a soldier who had not yet been defeated. The auctioneer didn't notice, of course. He was already scanning the room for a bidder, already moving on to the next item. But to those watching closely, there was something there, something more than just the physical appearance of a dog. There was a glimmer of resilience, a silent cry for help, and a flicker of hope. No one could have known that the next moment would change everything. The dog was still, quiet, almost lifeless in his demeanor, but those who looked closely could see the faint rise and fall of his chest. He was still there. He was still fighting. Fighting not for himself, but for the chance to prove that he was worth more than the cruel words of the auctioneer, more than the price tag they tried to attach to his broken body. It was in this moment, when the room was filled with mockery and laughter, that the dog's fate would take a turn. This was no ordinary dog. And what happened next would prove that sometimes, heroes don't come in shiny armor or human form. Sometimes, they come in the shape of a broken soldier, trying one last time to show loyalty, to show courage, even when the world around him doesn't care. And this German shepherd was about to prove just that. Ethan Walker stood on the porch of his small ranch, his boots dusted with the dry earth of the Montana plains, his eyes staring into the distance where the sun began to dip beneath the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, but even the beauty of the scene couldn't erase the heaviness in his heart. He had lived here for 3 years now, alone, in the old ranch his grandfather had left him. The solitude was both a sanctuary and a prison, offering space to breathe, yet a constant reminder of the battles he fought, not just on the field, but within himself. The morning ritual was always the same: coffee at dawn, a silent walk through the barn, tending to the few horses his grandfather had raised, and checking the fences, which had long since fallen into disrepair. His hands were rough from years of hard work, but they weren't just calloused from the land. They bore the marks of years spent serving in the military. Ethan's Marine Corps years had been filled with moments of glory, yes, but also an endless collection of nightmares and scars that refused to fade. The stillness of the ranch was deceptive. To the outside world, it was a peaceful, quiet haven. But to Ethan, every corner of this land was laced with the echoes of the past. The things he'd seen, the things he'd done. The faces of the men he had lost still haunted him at night, their smiles forever etched in his mind. He had tried everything to shake the memories, but the war was never far behind him, always lurking in the dark corners of his mind. Ethan had come back from his last deployment 3 years ago, but in many ways, he hadn't really come home. His body had returned to Montana, but his mind had never left the heat of the desert, the chaos of the firefights, the overwhelming loss. The small ranch had become both his refuge and his prison. His days were marked by routine, an attempt to regain some semblance of normalcy in a life that had become anything but. Yet no matter how much he tried to bury the pain, the memories resurfaced in the quiet of the night. The flashes of explosions, the sounds of gunfire, the screams of comrades, their faces, their names, all of them chasing him in his sleep, night after night. The local VA office had called him countless times, offering help, but their voices only echoed in his answering machine. The medications they prescribed sat unopened in his bathroom cabinet, gathering dust. He didn't need pills. He needed to forget. He needed peace. But peace had been elusive. One morning, as Ethan sat at his kitchen table with his cup of coffee, the sound of the newspaper being tossed onto his porch broke the silence. He walked outside to grab it, the crisp morning air biting at his skin. As he flipped through the pages, something caught his eye. It was a small ad buried in the classifieds under animal auctions. Former military dog. Aggressive, no training possible. Final auction before euthanasia. Call for details. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the words for a moment, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. His heart raced as a deep, instinctive pull washed over him. He didn't even need to read further, he knew what it meant. It meant that the dog, once a soldier, was now seen as nothing more than an object to be sold off. A broken animal, discarded after serving its purpose. The same way he felt, like a discarded soldier. There was no reason for him to go. He didn't need a dog. The ranch was already too quiet, too lonely, and the thought of caring for another living thing felt overwhelming. But something gnawed at him, deep inside. Something in those few lines of text stirred a memory, a flicker of a time when he had served alongside animals like this one, loyal, brave, and unyielding. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, staring out at the vast expanse of his land. He had made a life for himself here, away from the chaos. And yet, the thought of that dog, trapped in an auction house, waiting for a fate that would likely end in death, kept gnawing at his insides. He knew what it felt like to be discarded, to be seen as nothing more than a broken tool. Maybe, just maybe, this dog didn't deserve that fate. Maybe, just maybe, he could give it a chance to heal, just as he was trying to do. The auction wasn't far from the ranch, just a short drive down the highway, and for a moment, Ethan considered it. He stood by the window, staring out at the fields where the horses grazed, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him like a thick fog. He wasn't looking for a dog. He wasn't looking for anything but a quiet life. But that the words, had already begun to pull him in. The idea of rescuing this dog, offering him the same chance at healing that he had never been given, seemed like a path he couldn't ignore. Ethan thought back to his time in the military, where the bond between soldiers and working dogs was forged in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. He remembered the dogs, loyal, fearless, always by their side, risking their lives without question. He remembered the last dog he'd worked with, a German shepherd named Max, who had died saving his unit. That memory hit him hard. The thought of Max, of their bond, was a reminder that the life of a soldier, whether human or animal, was one of sacrifice, duty, and loyalty. He looked down at the auction ad again. Aggressive, no training possible, the words were cold, dismissive. They didn't capture the essence of what this dog had endured. This dog wasn't just aggressive. This dog was broken, but not beyond saving. He was a warrior, just like Ethan. And maybe, just maybe, the two of them could heal together. Without another thought, Ethan grabbed his jacket and headed for the truck. He didn't know what he was hoping for, but something deep inside him whispered that this was his chance to do something right. This wasn't about getting a dog, it was about helping a fellow warrior. And so, he drove toward the auction house, the engine of the truck rumbling beneath him like the beat of his heart, each mile drawing him closer to a decision he knew would change both of their lives. The creak of the truck's door closing echoed through the still air as Ethan stepped out and made his way toward the entrance of the auction house. The ground beneath his boots was gravelly, a sharp contrast to the smooth asphalt of the roads that led into town. Each step felt heavier than the last, like his boots were pulling him deeper into a place he wasn't sure he belonged. His hand brushed against the worn leather of his jacket as he made his way across the yard, the weight of his decision hanging over him like a storm cloud. As he approached the auction house, he could hear the chatter of the crowd inside, voices muffled, rising and falling in idle conversation. The low hum of fluorescent lights flickered faintly through the cracked windows, casting an unwelcoming glow over the building. The sight of the barn-like structure, run down and unkempt, made him uneasy. He hadn't expected anything grand, but the sight of this place stirred something in his chest, a sense of dread that gnawed at him. Ethan hesitated just outside the door, his fingers brushing the handle, feeling the cold metal beneath his touch. He wasn't sure why he was here. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. But something, the desperation in the dog's description, the haunting words of damaged goods, that rang in his mind kept pushing him forward. With a deep breath, he pulled open the door, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the dim light and sterile air hit him like a punch to the gut. The room was filled with people milling around, the low murmur of conversation mixing with the occasional rustle of papers or the clink of coins. At the center of the room, in a small pen, lay the German Shepherd. He was motionless, stretched out across the concrete floor like a discarded rag. His fur, once thick and full, was ragged, patched in places, and dull. His ribs jutted out painfully, visible beneath the thin, bruised coat. Ethan's heart sank as he watched the dog. This soldier, this warrior, lying there like he had given up. The dog's head was bowed, his eyes hidden beneath the weight of exhaustion and pain. Around him, the crowd continued to joke and laugh. $50. The auctioneer's voice rang out, barely audible above the chatter. $50 for this poor soul. Any takers? No. He looked over the crowd with a casual smile, as if this were just another transaction. Not worth a dime, eh? Well, 50 it is. Ethan's gaze was fixed on the dog in the pen. He couldn't explain it, couldn't justify the feeling building inside him, but something about the scene hit him like a blow to the chest. This wasn't just an animal. This was a soul, lost and discarded, treated as if its life meant nothing. The more he looked at the dog, the more the weight of the situation pressed on him. It was as if they shared a bond that transcended the years, a silent understanding between two broken creatures. The dog remained motionless, unfazed by the noise around him, as if he had already accepted his fate. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this dog than what was being shown. Maybe it was the eyes, those deep, sorrow-filled eyes, or maybe it was the quiet way the dog lay there, as though waiting for someone to acknowledge him, to give him a second chance. Ethan took a few tentative steps toward the pen, his boots tapping lightly against the concrete. His heart thudded in his chest as he approached the dog, each step heavier than the last. The murmurs of the crowd faded into the background, and in that moment, it felt as though the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But the dog didn't move, didn't raise his head. His body was limp, as if he had already resigned himself to being forgotten. Ethan knelt slowly beside the pen, keeping a respectful distance at first. His voice was low, careful, trying not to startle the dog. "Hey, buddy," he murmured softly, his tone calm and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not like them. You're safe now." For a long moment, the dog didn't respond. Ethan could feel the heaviness in the air, the tension between them. The dog's eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow. There was something tragic about the stillness. Ethan's hand hovered near the edge of the pen, unsure whether to reach out or wait. But then, just as the weight of the silence became unbearable, the dog's head lifted slightly. Slowly, his eyes opened, and in that moment, their gazes met. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There, staring back at him, was a look that mirrored his own. The dog's eyes were filled with a deep, hollow pain, an unspoken recognition that pierced through him. It was as though they both understood what it meant to carry the burden of a war no one else could see. The dog had been broken, abandoned by those who once relied on him, just as Ethan had been discarded after serving his time. For the briefest of moments, the world seemed to stand still. In those eyes, Ethan saw not just a dog, but a warrior, a soul who had fought, bled, and endured unimaginable pain. He saw himself in those eyes, the same haunted, weary look that had followed him since his return from Afghanistan. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. It was a silent understanding. No words were needed. They both carried the same scars. Ethan's heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in years: empathy, compassion. It was the same feeling he had felt back when he worked alongside military dogs, back when they were a team, partners in the field. This was more than just an animal in need. This was a creature who understood him as he understood it. And in that fleeting moment, he knew what he had to do. The bidding continued in the background, but Ethan's decision had already been made. The low price of $50 no longer seemed like a mockery. It was a chance. A chance for both of them to heal, to find purpose again. They weren't just buying a dog. He was offering this animal something no one else would. The chance to be more than just a soldier's tool. The chance to be a partner. A friend. With a quiet resolve, Ethan stood up, his gaze never leaving the dog's eyes. "I'll take him," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise of the auction house. The auctioneer's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly regained his composure. "Sold," he announced with an air of indifference. Ethan didn't care about the crowd or the mockery. All that mattered was that the German Shepherd was no longer alone, and neither was he. They were both about to embark on a journey of healing, together. As the auctioneer's gavel slammed down, the clatter of coins and murmurs of the crowd grew distant. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of his decision settling in his chest. He had won the dog. No, he had saved him. Rex, the German Shepherd, was no longer a casualty of war, abandoned in the cold corners of an auction house. But as the auctioneer moved to hand over the leash, Ethan could feel the eyes of the crowd lingering on him, judging him, dismissing him, as if they couldn't fathom why someone would want to take a dog like this home. "Here you go," the auctioneer said, his voice still carrying a trace of mockery, his eyes gleaming as if he were delivering a damaged item of no worth. He handed Ethan the frayed leash, but his words were still sharp, filled with disdain. "You can have him. Just don't expect much." Ethan took the leash with a quiet nod, not paying attention to the auctioneer anymore. Rex was his now. The crowd, full of whispers and stifled chuckles, faded into the background as Ethan bent down to gently untie the dog's worn collar. As he did, Rex shifted slightly, his body tensing ever so slightly at the contact. It was a small movement, but it was there, a sign that the dog was still aware, still present, still alive in ways that no one had bothered to see until now. The auctioneer's mocking voice became a faint hum as Ethan stood, guiding Rex out of the pen, his other hand gently resting on the dog's back. The German Shepherd didn't resist, but there was an underlying tenseness in his movements, as if he expected something to happen at any moment. Ethan kept his pace steady, his mind focused only on the task at hand, getting out of this place, away from the crowd, and onto the road where he could take the first step toward giving Rex the life he deserved. But the moment they reached the exit, a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Where do you think you're going with that thing?" The voice was cold and familiar, laced with contempt. Ethan turned, his hand instinctively tightening around the leash. Standing a few feet away was a man in a tattered military jacket, his posture stiff, his eyes hard with an unspoken malice. Ethan could feel the hairs on the back of his neck rise as he took in the man's expression. This wasn't just another bystander. This was someone who knew Rex, someone who had been a part of his past. "Don't think for a second that dog's going anywhere with you," the man continued, stepping closer. "He's a liability. He's broken, just like the rest of you." Ethan's eyes narrowed. His military training kicked in, but he kept his voice calm, controlled. "That's not your concern anymore," he said, his tone low but firm. The man took another step forward, his hand reaching for the collar in an aggressive motion. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he sneered. "He's a monster. He should be put down just like the rest of them." Rex's body stiffened at the mention of the man's voice, his hackles raised instinctively. His ears flicked back, and his mouth pulled into a tight snarl. Ethan noticed it instantly. The dog wasn't just reacting to the man's words, he was reacting to the man himself. "Step back," Ethan warned, his voice growing harder. "I don't know who you are, but if you come any closer, I'll make sure you regret it." The man ignored the warning and lunged for Rex's collar. But before Ethan could react, Rex did something unexpected, something that would change the course of the moment. With a low, guttural growl that echoed through the silence of the auction house, Rex launched himself between Ethan and the man. His massive body moved with purpose and speed, a flash of muscle and energy that caught Ethan off guard. The dog's stance was one of pure instinct, a warrior's protective stance. He stood between Ethan and the man, his teeth bared, his eyes flashing with something far more powerful than the pain that had weighed him down moments before. "Rex," Ethan whispered, but the dog didn't back down. Instead, his gaze locked on the man with an intensity that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. The man stopped dead in his tracks, his hand hovering just inches from Rex's collar. For a long moment, the two stood there, man, dog, and the faint, painful memories of the past. It was as if time had stopped, and Ethan could see in Rex's eyes the depth of the dog's loyalty, his willingness to fight for the one person who had shown him kindness in a world that had abandoned him. The man's bravado faltered as he took a step back, his eyes widening in surprise. "You," he choked on his words, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. "You don't get it, do you?" he spat. "He's broken. He's a weapon, nothing more." Ethan didn't take his eyes off Rex, his hands still gently resting on the dog's back. "He's more than that," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "He's a protector. And he's mine now." The man's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. But before he could say another word, Rex let out another growl, a low, menacing sound that reverberated in the quiet space. It was a warning, a promise. This dog wasn't backing down. And then, without another word, the man turned and walked away, muttering curses under his breath. Ethan watched him go, his heart pounding in his chest. But his focus never shifted from Rex. The dog stood firm, his stance protective and strong, his loyalty already evident in the way he positioned himself between Ethan and the threat. Ethan took a step forward, reaching out a hand to gently touch Rex's shoulder. "You're not just a broken dog," he murmured softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a warrior, and you're not alone anymore." Rex's eyes softened as he turned to Ethan, the tension in his body slowly easing. It wasn't just the man he had been protecting, it was the bond they were beginning to form, the unspoken understanding that had passed between them in that brief, tense moment. This wasn't just a dog. This was a partner, a protector. Ethan could feel his heart swelling in his chest as the weight of the moment settled over him. Rex had not only saved him from an immediate threat, but he had also shown something much deeper, a bravery, a deep instinct to protect, and a loyalty that Ethan hadn't known he could find again. As they walked out of the auction house, Rex moved beside Ethan, his body language more relaxed, yet still alert. They didn't speak, but there was a shared understanding between them, a quiet promise that they were in this together, no longer broken, no longer abandoned. And as they stepped into the bright Montana sun, Ethan knew that this was the beginning of something far greater than either of them had anticipated. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a partner in the battle for healing, a battle they would fight together. The truck's tires crunched over the gravel as Ethan pulled into the driveway of his ranch, the truck rumbling beneath him. The wide expanse of land stretched out before him, a mixture of rolling hills, grassland, and the distant silhouette of the barn. The quiet of the Montana countryside was soothing, almost like a balm to the wounds he had carried for so long. Yet, as the truck came to a halt, Ethan felt a pang of uncertainty. This was it. Rex was here now, with him, on the land that had been his refuge from the world, but was it truly ready to be a home for them both? Rex, still tethered by the worn leash, sat quietly in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. The dog hadn't moved much since they left the auction house, his posture tense, but his gaze, always alert, was drawn to the vastness of the land. There was a noticeable unease in his body language, and Ethan knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be easy for either of them. Ethan opened the door and stepped out of the truck, the cold wind biting at his face as it swept across the plains. He stood there for a moment, taking in the stillness around him. The land seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Rex didn't follow immediately. Instead, he stayed in the truck, his body stiff, his eyes wide. He didn't know this place. He didn't know what to expect here. The dog was still processing, still unsure, still carrying the weight of all the trauma that had been inflicted on him. His instinct to fight, to protect, to survive. It was all still there, just waiting for the right moment to resurface. "Come on, buddy," Ethan called softly, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. He took a few steps toward the back of the truck, slowly unhooking the leash. "You're safe here. You don't have to worry." At first, Rex didn't move. He just watched Ethan with those deep, haunted eyes, the tension in his posture making it clear he wasn't entirely convinced. Ethan sighed, then moved around the front of the truck, taking a few steps toward the barn. It was just a matter of time, he knew, before the dog would follow. He couldn't force him, just like he couldn't force himself to forget the war. Healing would take time. As Ethan reached the barn, he glanced over his shoulder, and to his surprise, Rex was standing in the driveway, his ears perked up. His body was still stiff, but his gaze had softened. He was watching Ethan, not with suspicion, but with something akin to curiosity. And slowly, Rex took the first tentative step forward, then another, and before long, he was walking alongside Ethan, just a few feet behind him. They didn't speak, but there was a quiet understanding between them. Rex wasn't ready to trust completely, but he wasn't backing away either. This was the first small step toward building a bond that neither of them had expected, but both needed more than they realized. Life on the ranch was slow, quiet, and routine. Each day was marked by simple tasks: feeding the horses, checking the fences, repairing what was broken. The peace of the land should have been a welcome change from the chaos of war, but for Ethan, it often felt like a cruel reminder of what he had left behind. His nights were filled with memories that refused to fade, and during the day, the silence was both comforting and suffocating. Rex's adjustment to the ranch was, at times, a mirror of Ethan's own struggles. He had trouble adjusting to the wide open spaces, his body visibly tense whenever Ethan would take him outside, as though the vastness of the land was too much to comprehend. The sound of a distant car or the rustle of a branch in the wind would cause Rex to flinch, his body frozen, his ears pinned back. He would stand still, his head swiveling as if searching for a threat, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. At night, when the wind howled through the trees, Rex would jump at every gust, his body trembling. He wasn't used to the peace, to the stillness. He had been trained for war, trained to survive in chaos. Now, in this unfamiliar environment, he had to learn to adapt, to trust again. And just like Rex, Ethan struggled. The nights were the hardest. They always were. The nightmares never seemed to end, each one dragging him back to the heat of the battlefields. The distant sounds of gunfire echoed in his ears, the faces of the men he had lost swirling in the darkness. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, the weight of his past pressing down on him. His mind would race with memories that felt too real, too painful to relive. But in the mornings, there was Rex, his steady presence a reminder that not everything had to be faced alone. Every time Ethan would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, struggling to catch his breath, he would feel the soft weight of Rex's body beside him. The dog, despite his own scars, was there, silent, but present. His calming presence, his quiet loyalty, was the first thing that brought Ethan peace. And slowly, over time, he began to realize that in saving Rex, he had found something for himself as well. The first significant change came quietly, one night when Ethan was sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the fields. The air was crisp, and the stars above shimmered like 1,000 tiny promises. He hadn't realized how much he'd been holding in, the weight of his grief and guilt pressing him down like a lead blanket. But as he sat there, lost in his thoughts, he felt a soft pressure at his side. Rex had walked up to him, his body stiff, but his posture more relaxed than usual. He sat down beside Ethan, his head resting gently against Ethan's knee. The dog didn't demand attention, didn't whine or nudge, but simply sat there, offering his quiet companionship. Ethan's heart clenched at the sight of the dog beside him. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan didn't feel so alone. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was shared, a mutual understanding that neither of them needed to speak to feel connected. Rex had become his anchor, just as Ethan had become the dog's. Ethan gently rested his hand on Rex's head, running his fingers through the dog's fur. He didn't know how much time had passed before he realized that the tears had begun to fall. Silent, soft tears, falling for the life he had lost, for the battles he had fought, for the things he couldn't forget. But they were different from the tears that had plagued him before. These tears weren't driven by anger or fear, they were the tears of healing. Rex turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Ethan's with a quiet, understanding gaze. The dog didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just stayed there, offering his presence. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan allowed himself to feel something other than guilt and pain. He allowed himself to feel hope. It wasn't a grand gesture, no heroic moment of clarity. But it was enough. It was the beginning of something. A healing, a partnership, a bond that was being forged through the quiet moments, the small gestures of trust. Rex had proven that he was not just a broken dog. He was a partner, a protector, a companion on a journey that would take them both to places they never expected. And in that moment, with Rex sitting beside him, Ethan realized that he wasn't just saving a dog. He was saving himself. The days on the ranch had been quieter than Ethan could remember, and for a while, he found solace in the stillness. He and Rex had carved out a routine, each day marked by the simple tasks of ranch life, but underneath the surface, an unspoken tension lingered. The peace was fragile, held together by the delicate threads of healing, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, something just beyond the horizon, something that could threaten the bond they had slowly built. It happened one afternoon when Ethan was in the barn, fixing the loose boards on the fence. Rex, ever vigilant, had followed him out, his paws crunching against the gravel as he paced restlessly nearby. Ethan worked methodically, his hands moving automatically as he worked the hammer into the wood, but his mind was elsewhere. Despite the progress they had made, despite the moments of comfort Rex had given him, there were times, quiet, hidden moments, when Ethan couldn't escape the weight of his own doubts. Am I enough? Ethan whispered to himself as he hammered the final nail into place. Can I really give you what you need? The words were barely a thought, but they lingered in the air like a shadow. He couldn't get rid of them. Despite everything, he still struggled to believe that he could be the kind of person Rex needed. A constant, stable presence, when the weight of his own trauma made it so difficult to provide that for anyone, let alone a dog who had seen far too much of the world's cruelty. But before he could linger on the thought, Rex let out a sharp bark, snapping Ethan back to reality. The dog was alert, his ears pricked forward, his body stiff, eyes scanning the horizon. Ethan's hand faltered, hammer poised in midair, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The quiet was suddenly interrupted by a sound that made the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand on end. A car. The low hum of an engine, distant but growing closer. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The familiar rumble of tires on gravel sent an uneasy shiver through him, but it wasn't just the car that set Rex off. It was the memories, the ones both man and dog were trying so desperately to escape. The car pulled up to the ranch's gate, its tires kicking up dust as it came to a stop. Rex's growl was low, deep, and instinctive, a sound that reverberated through the ground beneath Ethan's boots. The dog's muscles tensed as he took a step forward, his body rigid with tension. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, his voice calm but firm. He reached out to steady Rex, but the dog wasn't looking at him. Rex's eyes were locked on the vehicle, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan saw something else in the dog's gaze. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. From behind the wheel, a figure stepped out of the car, tall and imposing, his face hidden beneath a dark cap. He moved toward the gate with purpose, his steps deliberate and calculated. Rex's growl intensified. Ethan felt his heart beat faster, his chest tightening as the figure drew closer. "Get back inside, Rex," Ethan called, but the dog was already moving. Before Ethan could stop him, Rex lunged toward the gate, his body sleek with power. The dog's growl had turned to a deep, guttural snarl, one that echoed with a past Ethan hadn't anticipated. Rex's eyes were locked on the figure now, his posture one of pure aggression. He was ready to fight. He wasn't just scared, he was triggered by something much darker, something far deeper. "Rex!" Ethan shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. He moved quickly, grabbing the dog's leash, but the German Shepherd wasn't listening. Rex's muscles rippled as he strained against the pole, and for a split second, Ethan saw the dog's face twist into something raw, something filled with a pain that only another soldier could understand. "Stay back," the man shouted, his voice carrying the same harshness as Rex's growl. "He's mine. I'm here to take him back." Ethan's blood ran cold. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stood frozen, the leash tight in his hand, as the man approached with slow, deliberate steps. "I don't know who you are," Ethan said, his voice firm, trying to keep the panic at bay. "But you're not taking him." The man stopped just a few feet away, his cold eyes narrowing as he looked past Ethan to the dog, still straining against the leash. "I know who you are, Marine," the man sneered. "I know exactly who you are. And I know this dog, this so-called war hero, was supposed to be put down. He was a liability, a threat." Ethan's grip tightened on the leash, the words slicing through the air. The tension between them thickened like smoke, and he could feel the unease in Rex's body, his muscles tight, every inch of him ready to act. "You don't know anything about him," Ethan replied, his voice rising with a quiet fury. "He's not some tool to be disposed of. He's not yours to claim." The man's lips curled into a sneer. "You don't get it, do you? I was his handler. He's nothing but a tool, a broken tool that didn't follow orders." He took a step closer. "He'll never fit into your little world out here. You can't fix him. He's mine and I'm taking him." But before Ethan could react, Rex lunged, the strength in his body making it clear that this wasn't a simple display of aggression. It was a deep, primal instinct. Rex wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting Ethan. He stood between the man and Ethan, his body tense, his teeth bared, ready to do whatever it took to keep the man from getting any closer. "Rex, no!" Ethan shouted, but the dog didn't move. His stance was one of raw, unflinching loyalty. The man stopped in his tracks, his eyes flicking between Ethan and Rex, confusion flashing across his face. "You think you've tamed him? He's broken. He's worthless. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this dog isn't fit for your life." Ethan stepped forward, standing tall, his posture stiff with the weight of the moment. "I don't need to tame him," he said, his voice low but strong. "I need him. And he needs me." The man glared at them, his eyes filled with a mix of contempt and disbelief. With one last, venomous glance, he turned and walked back to his car, his footsteps heavy with defeat. As the sound of the car's engine faded into the distance, Ethan stood still, the weight of the encounter sinking in. Rex remained at his side, his body still tense but slowly beginning to relax. The bond between them had been tested in that moment. It wasn't just a physical confrontation, it was a challenge to their healing journey, a reminder that the past could resurface at any time, bringing with it memories and scars that would never fully fade. But as Rex leaned against him, his body gently pressing into Ethan's leg, the soldier realized something. They weren't just fighting their past anymore. They were fighting it together. And for the first time, Ethan felt the weight of his own doubts beginning to lift. Rex wasn't just a broken dog, he was a partner, one who had chosen to stand by his side when everything seemed impossible. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but in this moment, Ethan knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. The evening had fallen over the ranch like a blanket, quiet and still, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant calls of coyotes marking the end of another long day. Ethan had finished his evening chores, feeding the horses, checking the barn, ensuring everything was in place, and now, as the night drew near, he leaned back against the porch railing, his eyes scanning the open land in front of him. The stars had begun to twinkle in the vast, cloudless sky above, and there was a kind of peace that came with the solitude of the ranch. It was the kind of peace he had longed for when he first arrived here, but tonight, it felt fragile, as though the calm was too good to last. Rex, as usual, lay by his side, not far from the porch, his body curled into a tight ball, but his ears were alert, his eyes trained on the surroundings. Ethan had gotten used to the dog's presence, but even so, he couldn't shake the sense that something was different tonight. It was a feeling that settled in his chest, an instinctual knowledge that something was about to happen. The sound came suddenly, so quietly at first that Ethan almost didn't hear it. A rustling in the bushes. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a rabbit, wandering too close to the fence. But then, the rustling grew louder, more deliberate. And then, the unmistakable sound of boots on the gravel path. His heart skipped a beat. Ethan's instincts kicked in before his mind could process the danger. His hand moved automatically to his waist, reaching for the gun he kept holstered, but before he could even fully turn, Rex was already on his feet, a low growl escaping from his chest. The dog's muscles rippled with purpose as he moved in front of Ethan, his body tense and ready. "Stay back, Rex," Ethan muttered, but the dog wasn't listening. There was no time for commands, no time for second thoughts. The threat was real, and Rex's protective instincts had already taken over. The rustling grew louder, closer. Ethan could hear the sound of a person breathing heavily, approaching with deliberate steps. His mind raced. Was it the same man from before? The one who had tried to claim Rex? Or was it someone else, someone more dangerous? His heart hammered in his chest, his grip tightening on the gun, but his focus remained on Rex. The dog had positioned himself between Ethan and the path, his posture rigid, his teeth bared in warning. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the dog or to himself. The figure finally emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by a hood. He moved with the confidence of someone who had been here before. The instant their eyes met, Ethan's body tensed. He recognized the look in the man's eyes, a predatory glint that told him all he needed to know. "Step away from the dog," the man growled, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for him." Ethan took a step back, positioning himself to keep Rex behind him. "You're not taking him," he said firmly, his voice unwavering despite the pounding of his heart. The man chuckled, the sound cold and mocking. "You still don't get it, do you? That dog doesn't belong here. He belongs with me. He's mine, and you don't get to play hero." The air between them crackled with tension. Ethan's fingers tightened around the gun, but before he could make a move, the man lunged forward, his arm reaching for Rex's collar. The next moment happened so fast, Ethan couldn't even blink. Rex was already in motion, his body a blur of muscle and strength. With a fierce snarl, the German Shepherd leaped forward, his powerful jaws snapping just inches from the man's arm. The force of the dog's movement sent the man stumbling back, but he didn't fall. Instead, he recovered quickly and lunged again, but this time, Rex was ready. The dog's body slammed into the man's chest with the force of a freight train, sending him crashing to the ground. The man's hand flailed in the air as he tried to regain his footing, but Rex was relentless. The dog stood over him, his growl deep and primal, his eyes filled with a ferocity that Ethan had never seen before. "Rex, stop!" Ethan shouted, but the dog didn't back down. This wasn't just a fight for dominance. This was something deeper, something primal. Rex wasn't just protecting his space. He was protecting Ethan. And in that moment, Ethan realized how far Rex had come, how much he had grown to trust him. The man struggled beneath Rex's weight, but Rex's hold was unyielding. His jaws remained locked, not with the intent to harm, but with the instinct to control, to dominate. Ethan rushed forward, pulling Rex off the man with all his strength, and in that instant, Rex released his grip, stepping back with a deep, rumbling growl, his eyes still fixed on the man. Ethan pointed the gun at the man, who was now on the ground, his hands held up in surrender. "Stay down," Ethan commanded, his voice low and steady. He kept his gun trained on the man, but his eyes were on Rex. The dog was panting heavily, his body shaking with adrenaline. His fur was bristling, his stance still tense, but there was a look in his eyes that Ethan hadn't seen before, a look of triumph, of protection. The dog had saved him. He had acted without hesitation, without fear. In the face of danger, Rex had stepped up, not just as a partner, but as a true protector. Ethan's heart raced in his chest as he holstered his gun, his hand reaching out to Rex. The dog took a cautious step toward him, his body still vibrating with the aftershock of the fight. Ethan knelt down, his hands gently resting on the dog's shoulders. "You saved me," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us both." Rex's eyes softened as he looked at Ethan, and for the first time, the tension in his body began to ease. The dog stepped closer, resting his head against Ethan's chest, as if seeking the comfort he had once been denied. Ethan could feel the warmth of Rex's body, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing, and in that moment, the weight of everything that had come before, the trauma, the fear, the uncertainty, seemed to lift. For both of them, the man on the ground groaned, but Ethan didn't take his eyes off Rex. The dog had proven something today, not just his loyalty, but his bravery, his strength, and the depth of the bond they had built together. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was Ethan's partner, his friend, his protector. The man, realizing the battle was lost, slowly began to rise. "This isn't over," he muttered, before disappearing into the night, leaving behind only the sound of his retreating footsteps. Ethan remained still for a moment, his hand resting on Rex's head, his heart finally beginning to slow. The danger had passed, but the realization of what had just happened, the fact that Rex had put himself in harm's way to protect him, was enough to shake him to his core. They were no longer just man and dog. They were partners, bound by something deeper than mere companionship. As the night air settled around them, Ethan stood, pulling Rex gently to his feet. Together, they walked back to the porch, the weight of the moment still heavy in the air, but the bond between them now unbreakable. They had saved each other. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, as Ethan stood by the edge of the field, watching the world slowly fade into twilight. The warmth of the day was starting to give way to the crisp coolness of evening, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest. It wasn't just the quiet beauty of the land or the stillness of the evening that calmed him. It was something deeper. It was the feeling of having found something he never thought he would again: healing. Rex stood beside him, his head slightly tilted as he gazed across the open space. The dog's coat, once ragged and matted, now gleamed in the fading sunlight, and his body, once stiff and broken, moved with fluidity and strength. His posture was relaxed, his eyes clear and bright. He was no longer the haunted creature that had first stepped onto the ranch. He had become the dog Ethan had always known he could be: a warrior, a protector, and a loyal companion. As Rex shifted slightly, he nudged his head into Ethan's side, seeking that quiet reassurance he had once needed in every moment. Ethan smiled, his hand automatically reaching down to scratch the dog behind the ears. Rex leaned into him, his body warm and solid, and in that simple gesture, Ethan felt the depth of their bond, the unspoken trust, the shared struggles, and the understanding that had taken root between them. The transformation in Rex had been nothing short of remarkable. The dog who had once flinched at loud noises, who had cowered at sudden movements, was now calm and confident. He no longer looked over his shoulder at every passing car or jumped at the crack of thunder. Rex had learned to embrace the stillness, just as Ethan had. The darkness of his past, the trauma that had once defined him, no longer held the same grip. It wasn't that the scars had disappeared, they hadn't. They never would. But Rex had found something more important: trust, not just in Ethan, but in himself. And as Rex stood there beside him, looking out at the same horizon that Ethan had come to call home, Ethan realized something profound. Rex wasn't the only one who had healed. Ethan's own transformation had been slower, more subtle, but no less significant. The nights had become less frequent, the nightmares fewer. He still woke up sometimes, the cold sweat clinging to his skin, but it wasn't as often. And when it did happen, there was Rex, standing by his side, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of Ethan's memories. The dog had become a living reminder that healing didn't happen overnight, but that it was possible. In saving Rex, Ethan had found a way to save himself, to rediscover a part of himself that he had thought was lost forever. For so long, Ethan had kept to himself, retreating into the solitude of the ranch, afraid to let anyone in, afraid to be vulnerable again. But Rex had slowly pulled him out of that isolation, showing him that there was value in partnership, in trust, in unconditional love. And in return, Ethan had done the same for Rex. They had both given each other a chance to be whole again. Now, standing side by side on the porch, the two of them shared a silence that was no longer filled with tension or unspoken fear. It was a peaceful quiet, one that reflected the deep connection they had built. Neither of them spoke, but words weren't needed. They had both come to understand that sometimes the greatest comfort comes in simply being together, in sharing the weight of the past without needing to discuss it. Ethan glanced down at Rex, the dog's eyes meeting his with that familiar spark of understanding. He didn't need to say anything. Rex had been there for him every step of the way. Through the darkest nights and the hardest moments, the dog had stood by his side, never asking for anything more than what Ethan had been willing to give. And now, as they stood together, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of a life built on trust, on healing, on a bond that neither of them had ever thought possible. Ethan leaned down, his hand resting gently on Rex's head, and he whispered, "We've made it, buddy. Together." Rex responded with a soft, contented sigh, his eyes closing as he leaned into Ethan's touch. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it symbolized everything they had fought for. The struggles, the doubts, the pain, they were all in the past now. What mattered was this moment, right here, with Rex by his side. The evening sky deepened to a rich shade of blue as the first stars appeared above, and the two of them stood there in the fading light, a man and his dog, no longer broken, no longer haunted by the past. Together, they had found a new beginning. And in that beginning, they had found something even more precious than healing. They had found home. Have you ever experienced the healing power of a pet's loyalty and love? There's something truly extraordinary about the bond between a person and their dog, a connection that goes beyond words, a love that doesn't need to be earned but is freely given. For Ethan and Rex, their journey together was one of healing, transformation, and unbreakable loyalty. But their story isn't unique. Many of us have experienced the profound impact that our pets can have on our lives. Whether they've been there through our hardest moments or simply shown us the quiet comfort of companionship, pets have a special way of making us feel seen, understood, and loved. We want to hear from you. Share your own story in the comments below. Whether it's the bond you share with your dog, cat, or any other animal, tell us how they've helped you heal, find strength, or simply get through a tough time. Let's honor the unsung heroes in our lives, those loyal companions who never ask for anything but our love and trust in return. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of hope, loyalty, and love. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date on future videos that celebrate the incredible relationships we share with our pets and the healing power of unconditional love. There's always more to discover, and we'd love for you to be a part of our growing community. Thank you for being here, and we can't wait to share more stories with you. Remember, every dog, every pet has their own story. Let's keep sharing them because when we do, we remind ourselves and the world of the incredible capacity for love and loyalty that exists in every corner of our lives.